You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and let's take a look at a twofold criminal charge. One of the phases was settled years ago. The second phase was settled late last week, and a West Virginia pharmacist will now spend her life behind bars. 42-year-old Natalie Cochran and her husband Michael, who was near the same age as Natalie when they met and married, had developed what some would say is the American dream. Together they have 2 children, Nicole and Ashton. Together they lived comfortable in their upper-class world. And together they own 2 businesses, Technology Management Solutions, or TMS, and Tactical Solutions Group, or TSG. And I'm going to say right off the bat, the vagueness of the titles of the businesses left me asking, are these made-up companies? Well, it turns out they kind of were. Natalie seemed to be taking money and property as collateral from individuals, and then also a financial institution, and then also several small companies. So she's gathering assets and cash all over the place with the promise that if these investors poured money into TSG and TMS, she would take that investment and reinvestment into government contracts that her company could facilitate and secure. She's saying, hey, my 2 companies are going to make millions. If you invest, you can have your piece of the pie, your portion of the millions. And like I said, it's pretty vague. After my research, it's still vague. TMS was allegedly involved in government-wide acquisition contracts. Okay, that's a company that provides cost-effective and innovative solutions for information technology requirements. Yeah, you still confused? Because I am. And TSG claimed to offer custom engineering services. These services included communication systems, telemetry, digital video, signal intelligence, and special ops support for the government and military. All right, all in all, she convinced 11 people to invest approximately $2.5 million in alleged government contracts. The investors paid with personal checks or a cashier's check, or maybe they will send money via a wire transfer. Business savvy Natalie didn't invest that money though. Instead, she absorbed the money into her personal life and into her personal bank accounts, and the investors received very little back. That's called a Ponzi scheme, and Natalie was hip deep in her fabricated version of 2 companies and the contracts they hadn't secured. She had no contracts. They were just plain made up. She did all of this from June of 2017 to August of 2019. During that time, she had used some of the money from the later investors to pay the earlier investors just to buy herself some time and then to also develop a quasi-verified reputation. But she was just shuffling some of the money. No returns on the investments existed because there were no contracts. Now, to keep up appearances, she bought a 1965 Shelby Cobra. She also spent money on lavish jewelry and some trips and a lifestyle just to convince people she really was business savvy Natalie. In February of 2019, the wheels started to come off the operation. See, Michael was having a day where he just didn't feel well. He was so sick that friends were even concerned. Natalie, after consulting with friends, shook off their concerns by saying she would just let Michael sleep it off. That always helps someone when they need to feel better. Well, remember, she's a pharmacist and she has medical knowledge. The sleeping it off wasn't the answer. Michael, who was 38 years old at the time, passed out at home, and Natalie left him on the couch, passed out for several hours. Eventually, she called for help, and Michael was transported to a regional hospital. While there, tests revealed that Michael had a blood glucose of 21. That's dangerously low. Normal levels should range from 70 to about 180. That's depending on if the person has just eaten or if it's been a bit since they've had any food. So 70 is low, and Michael has a level of 21. And when it's that low, a person may lose consciousness or even fall into a coma. When medical personnel couldn't repair the damage done to Michael's body, he was sent home on hospice care, and he died 5 days later. Natalie and Michael had been married for 19 years. 19 years of memories. They've got 2 kids together. They've got 2 businesses. Almost 2 decades of life experience. And yet, no funeral was held. The obituary? It's bare bones. There's no mention of a career or places where they lived or hobbies. Nothing. When Natalie was asked why nothing was done for Michael in regard to a memorial service, she said Michael had always requested that no funeral be held. Now, for most people in Natalie and Michael's lives, the next few months left them just baffled. Michael's death did not seem accidental, and Natalie's Ponzi scheme was about to be discovered. In November of that year, 9 months after Michael's death, Natalie was arrested by the federal government and charged with federal wire fraud and money laundering. 1 year after her arrest, Natalie settled for a plea deal with the feds. She had been imprisoned during that time while she was awaiting the trial and then the eventual plea deal, and she was also awaiting a possible murder charge. We'll get to that one in just a second. After her plea deal, Natalie was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. During her sentencing, she admitted that she had caused financial hardships to those who had invested with her. All that she still owned was seized. She owed $2.6 million in restitution to her victims. Even with the seizure of her bank accounts and her assets, she wasn't going to be able to pay all of that back. And what about their 2 children who were teenagers, Nicole and Ashton? Well, Natalie's mother, Daphne Jessup, was granted custody. But this was tough on these kids. They were still mourning the loss of their father, and now their mother has been exposed for a thief and potentially a murderer. So let's get to that murder charge. While the feds developed their case for the Ponzi scheme, local police charged Natalie with the murder of her husband, Michael. But they dropped the charges. It seems they didn't feel like they had enough evidence to make the murder charge stick. And to gather more evidence, they exhumed Michael's body. Following further examination of Michael's body, murder charges were again filed. The authorities believed Natalie had injected Michael with a dangerous dose of insulin, which led to him passing out on the couch. And her unwillingness to get him medical attention allowed the damage to be done to his organs and Michael to eventually die from that damage. In January of this year, Natalie finally faced a jury of her peers, facing a charge of first-degree murder. Friends of the couple were called to the stand by the state to testify about the day that Michael fell ill. John Hamilton, he's a family friend and a state police trooper. Well, he was called by Natalie that morning to ask him to come over and check on Michael. He testified that he told Natalie that Michael needed immediate medical attention, but she chose not to heed his advice. Then Natalie's good friend Jennifer Davis testified that Natalie had messaged her and said that both her and Michael were sick and that if she could get her hands on some insulin, that her symptoms would likely subside. Well, Jennifer said she would share her insulin with Natalie, and Jennifer's husband delivered the medication to the Cochran home. Hours after the delivery, Natalie texted a picture of Michael passed out on the floor to Jennifer. Yet, she still did not heed the advice to take him to the hospital. Jennifer also told jurors that when Michael was returned home on hospice, that Natalie asked her to help her hold a pillow over Michael's face because it was too difficult to watch him die this way. Now, when the Ponzi scheme was brought up in court, Natalie's attorneys tried to explain to jurors that Michael was the one who was driving the Ponzi scheme, not Natalie. He said Natalie worked full-time, making $120,000 a year as a pharmacist, and Michael, well, he was unemployed. The attorney also suggested that Michael got his parents involved in the scheme and that all the documents had his name on them. He even had the P.O. boxes registered to his name. Prosecutor Truman, well, he countered that idea. He said that Natalie poisoned Michael because he wanted out of the scheme. He was tired of ripping off friends and family and money not coming in. All right, so we've got the motives a little bit. The trial also revealed this. During the search of the Cochran home, following Michael's death, 3 vials were found. One had a label of insulin, one had a label of a steroid, and the third, well, it didn't even have a label. The defense claimed that there was 0 proof that a vial was used to inject Michael, specifically that vial that had insulin on it. However, 2 experts took the stand for the state. First, an FBI forensic examiner testified that that specific vial of insulin, well, he said the top had been punctured by a needle, so it had been used. And second, an endocrinologist and a diabetes expert testified that when Michael was admitted to the hospital, his glucose level was indeed 21. She did say that she couldn't verify that the levels came from a result of an insulin injection, but she also said she didn't think the levels came from like severe malnutrition or from any other drugs that Michael might have been using. The state was close to resting their case, but first they called a state trooper who investigated the case. He said Natalie had given 3 different stories for what had happened that February day that Michael collapsed. He said she first said they were together in the house when Michael went into the kitchen and collapsed on the floor. She said she had found the steroid bottle on the counter. Well, in the second story, it varied slightly. She said they were together, and when Michael collapsed, he hit his head on the kitchen counter. In that version, the steroid vial was in the cupboard. And the third version had Michael collapsing while injecting himself with insulin in his back. Now, that trooper also reviewed text messages between Michael and Natalie. And he said he believed that Michael was really unaware of the critical nature of the Ponzi scheme. He said Michael believed that the couple were going to take a trip that was scheduled for the day after he collapsed. That trip to Virginia was supposed to include the couple picking up money, and this money was going to be given to their investors. When the defense began calling witnesses, Natalie's 2 children took the stand. They both said their father took a steady diet of supplements and steroids. Most days, it seemed Michael was taking about 40 pills, and that he had even been ill far before the February day of the collapse. They said he was fit, but that he also complained of headaches and forgetfulness and dizzy spells. Both kids also said that Michael was often working on the government contracts at the computer before his death. The defense was trying to prove that Michael was in the Ponzi scheme as deep as Natalie, that the prosecution's motive of Natalie getting rid of Michael so that he wouldn't rat her out in the Ponzi scheme, well, they're saying that just doesn't hold water because Michael is always doing the contracts. Well, Natalie's sister also told the court that Michael had injected himself with substances in front of her. She just didn't know if it was insulin or some other drug. Now, 2 defense experts took the stand testifying that 2 autopsies never established how Michael died. And the family doctor testified that Natalie had been seen in office the day before Michael collapsed. He said she was too sick to travel to Virginia and advised that they cancel the trip. All right, it boiled down to this. The state believed that they had the motive of Natalie silencing her husband and that it had to be done before the failed pickup of money in Virginia. They also said that the only way a healthy 38-year-old man could have a glucose level of 21 is if he was injected with insulin. The prosecutor also said Natalie had been warned by loved ones to take Michael to the hospital, and she chose not to, even with her medical knowledge. The state also highlighted that even after the death of Michael, Natalie kept asking people for money. She was still trying to make the Ponzi scheme work. Now the defense. They painted Michael as a drug user and that his excessive use was the reason his blood sugar was so low on that day. The attorney did acknowledge the Ponzi scheme, calling Natalie a, quote, big girl who cheated people out of money, but he said she wasn't a murderer. Well, it didn't take long for the jury to make up their minds. Just 2 hours. And they returned with a guilty verdict. But there's more. They also returned with a no mercy verdict. They condemned Natalie Cochran to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, as I researched this story, I just kept thinking about those kids who were 12 and 10 years old when this all went down. And now they had to testify in court. They were hoping their mom would be out of federal prison in about 5 years. And those hopes are just gone. Testimony in this case revealed that the fighting between the paternal and maternal grandparents was thriving the whole time, and it's still vibrant. That's heartbreaking. Video of the kids begging for mercy for their mother, well, that video's out there if you want to find it. I'll say this, that courtroom was full of broken people, and money was at the root of all the pain. Let me know in the comments what you think of this case. Well, it's a new month, so we're due. It's another new lawsuit for Sean P. Diddy Combs. This time, the suit has been filed by an anonymous male singer, and the year is 2015, and it's another after party in Los Angeles. Also the same, the attorney handling the lawsuit, Texas-based litigation attorney Tony Busby. Well, the lawsuit was filed Monday in the New York County Supreme Court, and according to filing documents, the promising singing up-and-comer, who was 23 years old at the time, well, he claims that P Diddy and John Doe, as he's referred to in the lawsuit, had interacted in the music scene. Through their conversations, John Doe believed that P. Diddy had promised him a record deal with Bad Boy Records and also had promised him a one-on-one studio experience with P. Diddy himself. Attorney Tony Busby says this suit filer, again named John Doe, was making his name fairly well known in the music industry all back in 2015. He had already opened for well-known artists at many venues across California, as well as multiple nightclub appearances at trendy clubs in the LA area. At one such performance at QC's 2020 nightclub in Montebello, John Doe had been told by a, quote, longtime and well-known associate of P. Diddy that P. Diddy was in attendance specifically to watch the young performer who he had heard about and that he had promising talent. Well, that same associate of P. Diddy allegedly told John Doe that if his performance was top-notch, P. Diddy would be offering him a record deal. Now, the suit claims that following the performance, John Doe attended an after-party where he was handed an alcoholic beverage. He was told that the drink had been sent over by P. Diddy. After sipping on the drink, John Doe said he became lightheaded and he eventually lost consciousness. While coming to and then passing out again, John Doe said he witnessed multiple people in the room engaging in sexual activity with each other. He was coherent enough at times that he alleges he saw some guests experiencing being drugged and assaulted, much like he feared was happening to him. At one point, John Doe says he regained consciousness to find his pants had been removed and that P. Diddy was groping him. John Doe alleges he believes more aggressive sexual activity had been taking place prior to him regaining consciousness. The suit states that John Doe did try to resist the activity, but P. Diddy allegedly threatened the singer, saying that he could easily contact his manager and ruin any chances he had of succeeding in the music industry if he didn't comply. Well, after this encounter, John Doe alleges that P. Diddy then demanded that he have sex with a woman that he didn't even know. John Doe says he agreed, but he asked P. Diddy if he could use the bathroom. And that's when John Doe got up, left, and escaped under the ruse that he was using the bathroom. Well, the suit does state that he did not report the abuse because he was afraid of being, quote, blackballed in the industry. He does claim the abuse caused so much mental and emotional pain and suffering that his career was eminently harmed and derailed. As a reminder, this is just one of dozens of suits to be filed against P. Diddy, all civil in nature. However, he is facing criminal charges of racketeering, sex trafficking, and transportation to engage in prostitution. He is currently detained in the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, and his upcoming trial is scheduled to begin on May 5th. I have no idea who this John Doe is. I'm sure the internet is abuzz with guesses. It's up to that person to reveal themselves if they so choose. However, I am waiting for a higher profile person to find, that reason to make their allegations public. I think that would change the trajectory of all of these cases, but I also acknowledge that's a heavy lift, that their emotional health may not be able to handle that. Of course, I'll keep you updated as his trial comes closer. And now a story from my home state. It's been a minute since we've chatted about Idaho in any different context than Lori and Chad Daybell murdering a spouse and 2 children, and then also Brian Koberger potentially murdering 4 college students in Moscow, Idaho. This one's not near that bad. Just a guy stealing merchandise from a Walmart, but man, was this guy creative. 32-year-old Dylan Rockwell was arrested on Monday after Walmart employees called in a burglary in progress. By the time police arrived, Dylan had left the store, but it didn't take them long to track him down, and when they did, police say he copped to thievery from that Walmart store, and he copped to other thefts that he had pulled off on other occasions, because he had a pretty nifty way of stealing. Dylan would wear a ring, and on that ring was a barcode for a Campbell's can of tomato soup worth a little bit more than $1. Dylan would enter the store, load up an expensive item like a gas grill, and then go through self-checkout where he would scan the barcode on the ring, pay a little over $1 with tax, and then walk out the doors holding a receipt. Now, workers might presume it was for that, say, gas grill, but it wasn't. The concocted purchasing ruse had been successful, but on Monday, the door worker caught on, and Dylan tried to leave with the $300 gas grill. When he was tracked down at his home, he was arrested without incident. He has been charged with felony burglary and misdemeanor petty theft. He's being held on a $25,000 bond. You're a pretty creative dude. You just weren't a good thief. And let's finish today with a quick update to the Ellen Greenberg case. We have discussed this case several times on Rise and Crime. It's one that haunts me. And hopefully we can have a chance to exorcise some of those nightmares now that her case has been reopened in Pennsylvania. Here's the quick reminder. Back in 2011, Ellen had returned to her apartment that she shared with her fiancé. She was home early and she began cutting up fruit. Her fiancé went to the gym, and when he returned, he said he was locked out. When he finally busted the door down, he said he found Ellen with 20 stab wounds. She was slumped in the corner of the kitchen cabinets. Fruit was partially cut up on the counter. At first, her death was ruled a homicide, and the crime scene was mysteriously released almost immediately, just hours later. And then the pathologist changed his ruling and determined she died by suicide, even though she had 20 stab wounds, some to the base of her head, which should have killed her, by the way. But she apparently could still stab herself through the skull and then stab herself in the chest, delivering the fatal blow. Ellen's parents have never given up the fight, filing multiple motions and lawsuits, trying to get the city of Philadelphia or the Pennsylvania Attorney General or state investigators, anyone to review the case. Well, life has been breathed back into the investigation. The Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office will reopen the investigation. It's all part of a settlement agreement. See, Ellen's parents sued the city, and in the settlement, the former pathologist submitted a sworn statement saying he was wrong to change his initial ruling of homicide to suicide. The suit claimed that the knife found in her chest was never fingerprinted, and that the apartment that was turned over to family very quickly had actually shown signs of a struggle. In the settlement, the Greenbergs did receive a monetary payout, the amount of which has yet to be revealed. But Ellen's parents have said it was never about the money. They just want justice for their daughter. Now, that former pathologist says he has received new info that has made him want to, potentially look at the case again. He said he's learned that the way and timing of Ellen's fiancé entering the apartment is now in question. He also said he's questioning if her body was either moved prior to 911 being called or at least moved before EMS arrived. It's been long contended that blood pooling and dripping did not match the way that Ellen was allegedly found in the kitchen of the apartment. All right, don't get too excited because here's the deal. This pathologist doesn't work for the city anymore. And so his thoughts might not match the current medical examiner's office. And I say might not with a strong probably not. The city police department, the medical examiner's office, and the mayor's office are all being pretty quiet. None of them have offered a strong explanation of where they are going from here. As for now, the Greenbergs are saying if this is all they get, then that will be enough. They wanted it known in some fashion that their daughter did not cause harm or death to herself. I'm always watching this case. I'll let you know if anything more comes of the reopening of the investigation. And now to listeners' comments from Monday's episode. Well, it's not settled really. Jen from Texas says that it's always been Whataburger. Yet Samantha from Corpus Christi, Texas says the burger franchise was started there, and they say Whataburger. She also recommends the breakfast sandwiches, by the way. Good Yelp review. So who knows? I'll try to change it to Whataburger. I had a big, long conversation with my son about this last night. He was making fun of me. He says it's definitely Whataburger. I'll try to extract that R somehow. And you guys, I'm so happy you picked up on all the play on words that I used in the cyber farting story. It's fun to at least giggle a little when writing about crime. Because if you remember the previous story in that episode about the adoptive parents who were charged with the racial crimes, that was horrible. And sometimes we just need a little laugh and a little break. All right, about that case, Tantinia, well, she expressed what we were all probably thinking. How was there not more oversight in the adoption of these kids? If they're receiving federal or state money to care for the kids, where's the oversight? It's a valid question with no current answer. And about that case when we talked about the doctor who allegedly removed a liver instead of a spleen, Lojo said what I had people stopping me in my city and saying to me, how does a doctor not know the difference? They're on the opposite sides of the body. And just because I need to share something that's just crazy, it's Super Bowl Sunday in 3 days. Did you guys know that if the Chiefs defeat the Eagles overall win-loss record will be 666 wins and 666 losses? I don't even know what that voodoo means for the universe, but there you go. Do what you want to with that information. All right, that's your Thursday episode of Rise and Crime. Thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing this experience with me. Please continue to let me know about the cases that you want covered. I did not even have the case of the pharmacist and the Ponzi scheme on my radar. And it was a listener who tipped me off to that case. So thank you. It was a great case to research. And as always, we love 5-star reviews and positive comments here. Please like and follow all of our social media accounts and our YouTube accounts that we have here at Ono Media, Murder with My Husband, Into the Dark, and, of course, Rise in Crime. Join me again on Monday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.